Imagine yourself in another person's shoes, preparing to give a speech in a stadium holding 250,000 people. You walk out of the tunnel, down an aisleway lined by thousands of people on your way to the podium. The band stops playing. The crowd hushes. As you scan the audience, you know you have everyone's undivided attention. You speak with the audience hanging on to every word that you say. By the time you reach your climatic conclusion, the audience is on their feet, chanting your name over and over, and you have just convinced a nation to enter a world war of conquest and genocide. The uniform you are wearing is that of a Nazi. The boots you are wearing are those of Adolf Hitler. This was the power of Adolf Hitler and his speeches during the 1930s and the 1940s. This evil man was such a powerful speaker that he was able to deceive millions to follow him on a maniacal path of war, destruction, and genocide. Today we will examine this infamous speaker and leader, and we can begin by taking a brief look at Adolf Hitler's rise to power. Much has been written about Adolf Hitler's life and how he became the leader of Nazi Germany. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889 in Brunau am Inn, Austria. Growing up, young Adolf wanted to go to school to be an artist. His father thought this to be impractical and foolish and sent him to the Realschule, or the real school, to learn a proper trade. Many think that this can attribute to Hitler's theft and collection of Europe's art treasures during World War II to this experience. Hitler moved to Germany in 1913, just before the onset of World War I. During the war, he served in the Bavarian Army for Germany, where he was blinded in a mustard gas attack in 1917 and hospitalized until the end of the war in 1918, when Germany surrendered. Adolf Hitler often stated that fighting in World War I was one of the great formative experiences of his life. Adolf Hitler became active in German politics in the 1920s after his dismissal from the German army. Much of German politics at the time centered on speakers and beer halls that many German men frequented, and Hitler was no exception. In 1921, Adolf Hitler became the leader of the German Workers' Party. After a failed attempt to seize power from the German government during the 1923 beer hall putsch, Hitler was arrested and jailed for 4.5 years. During this time in prison, Hitler wrote his autobiographical book, Mein Kampf, which translated means My Struggle. In 1933, the Nazi Party elected Adolf Hitler as chancellor, and soon the Nazi regime took over control of the German government. This effectively began Hitler's reign of terror on Europe and the globe. Hitler led Nazi Germany on a campaign of world war and genocide of 6 million Jews, not to mention numerous political opponents, communists, and other, quote, undesirables and misfits. Ultimately, Hitler came up with the final solution of mechanized death, with concentration camps receiving victims by boxcar, execution in gas chambers, and disposal of the bodies by burning them in huge crematoriums. As the tide of the war in Europe changed and Germany's defeat was imminent with the Soviet invasion of Berlin, Adolf Hitler committed suicide in his Führer bunker by shooting himself in the head on April 30th, 1945. The earth was finally rid of one of the most evil and prolific public speakers in its history. It is of much importance to realize the role that public speaking had in Hitler's career and his rise to power. After World War I, Hitler started listening to the many political speeches in German beer halls. Soon Hitler started giving speeches himself and found he was rather good at it. Adolf Hitler realized early on the power he held in public speaking and how he could sway public opinion. Hitler held so much control over his audiences that men would often stop drinking altogether and women were said to swoon and sometimes faint. Spurred on by the energy from his public speaking, Hitler rose to power in the German Workers' Party and later the Nazi Party. Hitler was able to control and mesmerize audiences numbering in hundreds of thousands. He also broadened his audiences by utilizing technology, broadcasting speeches over the radio to millions, and making propaganda films such as The Triumph of the Will. The topics of Hitler's speeches often revolved around things that Germans were desperate to hear after World War I, such as returning to Germany to its former greatness. Germany was in a shambles after World War I, literally and economically. Hitler spoke of rebuilding Germany after the Treaty of Versailles, which many Germans considered unfair. Restoring German pride and enhancing a sense of German nationalism was also one of Hitler's favorite topics to speak about. But hidden behind these words were also messages revolving around the need to expand Germany's borders and the need for ethnic cleansing. Hitler blamed Jews and communists for Germany's economic woes and preached that Germany and later all of Europe and the globe needed to be purged of the Jews. Hitler was very skilled in his oratory techniques that he used to spread his sinister message of war, racial hate, and intolerance. Adolf Hitler often spoke using very eloquent words in terms of ideals, but not so much as that the common man could not understand what he was trying to say. Mastery and control of his audience was something that Hitler also excelled in. Hitler would often take the podium and not speak for minutes to command an audience's attention and to build tension. Hitler practiced relentlessly in front of mirrors using mimicry, facial expressions, wild hand and body movements. His assistants often photographed these practice sessions, which he later studied and examined them, and then had them destroyed after he was done. Only a handful of these practice shots exist to this day. Hitler was also a master of cadence and volume in his speeches. Witnesses say Hitler had an rhythmic, almost hypnotic method of delivery and would often start out his speeches in a quiet manner, ramping up into a crescendo, finally working the audience into a frenzy in the process. The importance of Hitler's oratory skills cannot be overlooked. Adolf Hitler was arguably the most evil man in modern times and all of history. It shows that while public speaking can often inspire people to do great things, it can also lead to coerce a nation into unspeakable acts of evil. In conclusion, it has been said that those who choose to ignore history are doomed to repeat it. It is important that we do not forget the power of public speaking and how Adolf Hitler influenced an entire nation into world war and genocide, and that he convinced them that this was for the common good of the country. By studying Hitler's speeches, techniques, and the methods he employed, we may be able to identify political candidates and leaders that may have intentions that are other than inspirational. As public speakers and global citizens, it is our duty to recognize and extinguish any trace of evil, hatred, bigotry that Adolf Hitler promoted in his speeches. And with our due diligence, hopefully we will never see global war, murder, and destruction of this kind ever again. on the face of the earth. Thank you.